It's time for the Blazor Power Hour.
Welcome to the Blazor Power Hour.
Introducing the Blazor Power Hour.
No, seriously, it's time for Blazor Power Hour.
Hey friends, it's time for the Blazor Power Hour.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the Blazor Power Hour.
You're checking out the Blazor Power Hour.
Welcome to the Blazor Power Hour.
It's time for the Blazor Power Hour.
Are you ready? Are you set? Got everything all ready to go? Let's do it. Let's do the Blazor Power Hour.
Hey friends, it's time for another Blazor Power Hour. Hope y'all are ready. This is a show where each week we dig into some Blazor topic and try to do as much as we can in an hour to see, hey, Mr. C# Fritz is here. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you being here. And definitely appreciate the intro. That's the best part of the show. Sorry it's over already. But hey, welcome. I absolutely love the intro. I reached out to a bunch of friends, Mr. Fritz here included, and said, I'd love to have you all introduce me for the Blazor Power Hour. And I had so many people submit clips that it was pretty amazing. So I love the introduction to the show. It's wonderful. Today we're going to cover Razor class libraries. And I'm going to show you some tricks that you can do with Razor class libraries with routing, so you can put pages in other libraries and then route those through your main Blazor application. So that leaves you open to do some pretty creative stuff. So let's jump in. Let's get started. I've got Visual Studio 2019. .NET 5 is installed, so this is the latest version of Blazor. I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new project to start with. And let's see here. I've just reinstalled everything, so I may have some stuff out of place. But let's go ahead and get our Blazor application up and running. I'm going to do a new Blazor app. Let's see here. Blazor and Razor libs, we'll call it. Go ahead and create a brand new project. It doesn't really matter at this point if I choose a Blazor server or Blazor WebAssembly project. I'm going to go ahead and choose a WebAssembly project. And we'll go ahead and add all the bells and whistles to it, just so we have everything in case we want to play with something in a little bit. Mr. Magoo making some jokes here about what time do we start. Yeah, time zones are hard. And especially when we mess around with those. Here in the US, we do daylight savings on top of our time zones, so things get shifted around, and we were tweeting things from the future, so that was fun. It's always a good time. So I've got a Blazor project here. And this is the full stack WebAssembly Blazor project. Let's zoom in on that for a second, see what we have. So I have my main solution, and there are 3 projects under that solution. So I have a client application, I have a server application, and I have a shared folder that has some shared logic. There's not a whole lot in there in this example. This is the Hello World example, and you can see we have the weather forecast object that's shared on the client and server. So you can share code that way. That's one thing that we can do. Let's go ahead and give this a run real quick just to make sure everything's working. It should be. And then we'll see exactly what the project looks like if you haven't seen it before. This is your basic Hello World application from Blazor. And we have just an index page. We have a counter component. And we have a fetch data page that shows a grid of simulated, I don't even know if you want to call it that, random weather forecast information. It's kind of generated on the fly. So it's a nice little starting point to build any type of application you might need. Today we're going to look at Razor class libraries. So let's do that next. If we have, for example, some components that we want to move to another library, let's go ahead and create a quick component. Let's do that first, and then we'll create our Razor class library, because that might help put things in perspective just a little bit better. Let's go ahead and we'll throw this, let's throw it under shared just so it's easy. We'll do add new item, Razor component, and we'll create an alert box in here. And we'll just piggyback on a little bit of Bootstrap code. We'll say div class equals alert danger. So we've got our alert box. We should probably add a child content area here so we can put something inside of that box, and then we'll need a code block for that, and a parameter that we can set that child content with. So this is going to be a render fragment. This gives us an area inside the alert box that we can add custom content to. Child content. And then we'll give it a getter and a setter. And that should be all we need for an alert box. And did I spell something wrong? Oh, it needs to be public. All parameters should be public. So we've got a public render fragment of child content that's wrapped inside of a div with an alert danger. So now if we go back to our index page, we should be able to use this alert box. We'll take the survey out here, and where it says welcome to your new app, we'll just go ahead and put our alert around that. So we have our alert box, and it says welcome to your new app. And if we run it again, you can see we have a red alert box wrapped around our hello world message here, or welcome to our new app message. So that's a really quick component that we just put together, and it's in our shared folder here. But what if we wanted to share that component with other Blazor applications? Maybe we use this alert box in more than one scenario. Maybe we have a couple apps in our enterprise or whatever we're working on, and we want to share that thing. So in my solution here, I'm going to right click. I'm going to say add new project, and let's do a Razor class library. So just typing in Razor is enough to get me the template that I want, and I'm going to choose next. Razor class library, we'll just call this maybe common components. So we have this we have this library of common components that we want to share, and then we'll bump this up to .NET 5. Make sure we get the latest bits there. And let's see. Let's go ahead and I just want to explain what this checkbox does. We're not going to check this, but there's this box that says support pages and views. If you check that box, that is if you're targeting Razor Pages. That's the Razor Pages framework. If you want to target the Razor Pages framework, you want to select that box. We're not doing that. We're going for Blazor Razor class libraries. So we won't check that box. We'll go ahead and hit create. And we'll get a stubbed out kind of example. Another hello world, if you want to call it that. So we have our common components here. So this now, if we look at it, we've got our client, our server, are shared between the client and server, and then we have this common components project as well that we can reference from our client library. Let's see. Curious Drive says Razor class library could be referred to in an MVC project, right? You can use Blazor or Razor components in MVC, so that is correct. You can use that. You can use it with Razor Pages as well, but in that dialog box that I just showed, if you select that use pages and views, you actually get a Razor Pages style Razor class library. So there's a little bit different conventions. There's a lot of Razor terminology that gets thrown around in .NET. That's probably something I can cover on another show. It's something I've done as a talk many times, but I can cover in detail on the show as well. So for the meantime, we've got our 3 projects here, and now we have a 4th. This one is a project we can share across not only this Razor library, this Blazor application, but we could actually share this across many Blazor applications, which is really cool and helpful. Let's see what we have inside of it right now. We have an imports file. That's a common convention that's shared in the Blazor project as well as a Razor class library. We have a component called component1.razor. We can put that in our app here and see what that looks like too. And it has some .NET code as well. There's an example JS interop that is in here, so we can see what that does in a minute too. And then in the ww root folder, again, this Razor class library isn't a fully functioning or running application, but it does have that common ww root pattern that we use in Blazor. So you'll find ww root up here. You notice this one's got a special icon on it because it's actually a static set of static resources that's being served by the application. This one, we don't have that same icon there. It is static information that gets served, but it's served in a different way. We'll talk about that too in a minute. But this ww root folder ends up becoming something else in your application. But we can still access these files from our consuming application. So whatever application takes a dependency on these common components, we still have access to this ww root folder. It's just done in a slightly different path than it would be if it was off of this ww root folder. Sorry, I know that sounds confusing because it kind of is. Let's see. We need to add a reference from our Razor class library client project. We need to reference these common components. So I'm going to come over to dependencies, and I am going to click add a project reference. And I'm going to choose common components. You can do this from the command line as well, but I'm going to check this box here, and that'll add our common components to our client library here. You can also see that reference get added in the CS proj file. So you can find it there. You can also manually add it there if you don't want to go through the dialogues. So we're able to do that. And let's see here. I think I may have made a mistake. And I pulled up the old Blazor application. So this is actually, looks like it might be throwing an error here. It looks like I've got a problem. And I think I might have chosen the .NET 2.1 version, or .NET 3.2 version, which is .NET Standard version of Blazor. So I'm actually going to remove this project in a moment here. We'll replace it. Let's get our alert box out first. Let's take this, and I'm just going to simply drag it and drop it into my components folder. And then I apologize for the mistake here. Let me delete this or remove it from the solution, and we'll add a brand new one. So I have the wrong version of Blazor application here. And to make matters worse, it looks like Visual Studio might have hung. So these things happen from time to time. They just like to happen even more when you're live streaming. All right, looks like I got it out of there. Let's see, just so I don't create any more confusion, I'm going to go to the folder. I'm going to remove this, the application here as well. So let's take that all out of there. We'll delete those files, and we'll go back to our solution just to make sure things don't get too crazy there. I'm going to go ahead and add that project back, this time with .NET 5. So my Blazor app, I selected the wrong version earlier. And we'll go ahead and create that again. Making sure I have .NET 5 selected this time. And we'll go ahead and hit create. All right, so we should have, yeah, there we go. Target framework is .NET 5 now, so we're good to go here. Now let's go ahead and add back that dependency. So I want to go into my client side, dependencies, add a project reference, and then common components. We'll hit OK. You'll see that pop up here. Now we have a reference to those components that are in that common components library. And just so I don't mess anything up, I can see something that's about to cause a problem here. And if you look at the common components library, you can see it's in bold there. And that means that is my default project. And if I try to run it, I'll get this error that says the output type of class library cannot be started directly. That means I'm trying to run this component library, which is not a runnable library. So what I need to do is come up here, and I can either select inside of this drop-down list to make this our default application, or I can just choose from this drop-down box here, which is much, much easier to find. But you can see I've got common components here. I want to run my server application that is going to serve my client-side app. So I'm going to go ahead and select that instead, and I should be able to Control F5 now. And I can run my application, and we're back to Hello World. Now I want to add back my alert box and some of the stuff that came with the Razor class library. So let's go ahead and do that. We added the dependency. I can see it right here in my projects. I can also see it in my CS proj. Let's make use of that thing. The first thing is we want to add kind of a global reference here, so we don't have to keep typing this out over and over again. I'm going to type in a using statement inside of my imports.razor file. So I'm going to go to here. It's a using common components, and that's going to make it globally available to my project. You don't have to put it there if you don't want to. You can put it in individual pages or components if you'd like. I'm just doing that for ease of use, so we don't have to keep typing that using statement in every page we use it in. So let's go over to our index page. And remember, I drug that alert box over to our common components library earlier. And now we actually have use of it because it's inside of this common components area. So I can come in here and I still have access to my alert box. You can see the IntelliSense come up right away. And there we go. So there's my alert. We can see that render in just a moment. We also have some other components I want to look at here. We have this component1.razor. This was part of their Hello World example, and that's available to our project as well. And if we control F5, we can run this. And you can see our custom component that we wrote at the very beginning. That is the alert box. And then we have a Blazor component that came from the Hello World template. And that is displayed below as well. So that's component 1 in the alert box. So those are coming from this common components library now. So we've moved some of our code off to an external dependency now. This component 1, let's take a look at that again. You can see it's got kind of a striped background. It's got some CSS styling. If we look at this and we choose our Chrome debugger tools here, you could see that there are some classes being assigned to that component. So I have my component, and then it has this weird little GUID looking set of numbers here. This is CSS isolation in Blazor. So it's using CSS isolation. And what I mean by that is if I dig into that component 1 underneath of it, you'll see that it has its own CSS file. So if we dig into that again, you can see .myComponent is the CSS selector, and it's missing all that gibberish at the end. So what happens is when we build our component library, Blazor is going to go in and it will append this custom attribute to our component or to our element. So we've got this custom attribute that's being added here. And that custom attribute lets us use a very specific CSS selector. And this is all automatically generated. And yeah, that is exactly like, I believe Angular and Vue and maybe even React use this convention for doing CSS isolation. So Blazor is doing this automatically because we've embedded that CSS file in with the component. We're using it as a component.razor.css to embed it in that component, and it gives it the isolation to that component scope. Now, you won't see a CSS file in this www root folder, and that actually gets resolved in, let's go back up to the entry points of the application. Those isolated CSS files get linked dynamically inside of this Blazor namespace styles.css link here. So that's where you'll find those styles, but you don't actually see that CSS file getting written out anywhere until runtime. So it gets generated as the application is compiled, and then it's automatically added with the app. Let's see. Also in this is a background image that's used in that component. So you can see we've got background.jpg, or sorry, background.png. So this PNG file gets resolved also. Let's see, did I close? I closed the running app. We'll go ahead and run that one more time. And I'll show you where that file actually gets resolved to. Let's go into sources here, and we should be able to see that file. And remember I said the www-root folder, even though it's named www-root here in Common Components, it doesn't actually get resolved in the application as www-root. It comes up as underscore content and then the namespace of that component library. So we've got underscore content. And remember, we named it Common Components. Whatever we name it, even if there's a dot in the middle, if it was Common Components dot shared, I don't know, just for example, that would be the namespace that would appear here. And that's where that background PNG file actually gets created. And then you can see the generated CSS file as well that gets pulled into the main application. So those get generated under this content folder that you don't actually see in your application because it's not there until the application is compiled and running. So that's where you'll find those resources. And then you can see that's the striped background that we're looking at in the app. So now we kind of know where things are coming from. We also have some .NET code that's not being taken advantage of by any of the components, which it doesn't need to be, but it does get surfaced in our main application if we want to use it there, or in we can use this example JS interop in Common Components, or we can also use it in this Blazor client application. So if we go back to our index page here, and we create a code block, we can actually access this. So what we have is example JS interop. It's going to take an IJS runtime, and it has a prompt function on it. So let's see if we can do something with that really quick. Let's go ahead and we'll add a button to our page. And let's go to the on click event, and we'll bind a method here. And we'll say show, and then we need to define a method. So we'll say void show dialog, like that. And then we can go ahead and bind that to our on click event. And inside of that show dialog, I can call example JS interop. Probably have to, do I have to new one of these up? I have to new one up. This is a class, and those methods aren't static. So let's do this. We'll say var. So we'll create an instance of it. Let me see here. I may actually have to use this as a service. Yeah. So there are some kind of pseudo documentation in here. So I have to actually use this as a service because it's using dependency injection here. So let me roll this back just a little bit. And we'll go into our program CS, and then we'll add a service for that JS interop. So we'll say builder. So this just shows that we can include services in our application, or in our Razor component library that can be shared with other applications. And then, sorry, I missed a question here by Curious Drive. Says, do you mean that you need to build the app every time you change a CSS file? I haven't tried it yet. With CSS isolation, I believe actually, yes, I think you have to rebuild the application before you see those CSS changes occur, because they are dependent on the build of the application to generate those files. So I know that's something they're working on for .NET 6, but I'm not typically a fan of CSS isolation. I'd rather do my CSS work more in a global scope. You can always move those things around as you solidify them, I guess. So if they need to be isolated, then if you're doing really fast iterative process, maybe you don't want to isolate them at first, so you can work on them a little faster. It's kind of a whole topic, though. Let's see here. So they suggest scoped DI service for that. So they add scoped, and we'll just say example. Oh, I don't have, even though I added an imports file for my views. So when I add something to underscore imports.razor, it makes it global to all of the Razor parts of my application, but I don't have a reference to this common library yet, which is why I'm not getting any IntelliSense. So I still need my using statement here. So I need to say common components here, because this is not a view, this is just .NET code. And now I should be able to create an example interop here and register that with dependency injection. So that is my example service that is shipping with this Hello World project here. So now if I go back to our index page where I was working on this earlier, I can use the inject directive. We'll use an example JS interop, and we'll call it example JS. And now I have access to it on the page, and I can call its methods. So you can see I have a prompt, and prompt is actually awaitable, and it's going to give me a string value back. So I can tell by looking at the signature of this method. When I call prompt, since it's a value task, that means it's going to be, it's going to return either a value or a task, and that is going to be a type of string. So I'm going to get a string back here after I await this task. So I can set up a prompt with a message. So we actually need to change this to async. Here, let's see. We'll need that in a second, but var, we'll get the result back by awaiting this JS interop, and we'll call prompt, and then we can say show my prompt message. It can be anything we want. I don't know why it says awaiting. I didn't mean to do that. So we'll await the JS interop here, and then this needs to be, you can see that red underscore now. Async, I don't want to do async void, an async task. There we go. So I have a task that's going to run, and it's going to get a result back. We're not doing anything with the result yet. So this is going to use JavaScript to set a prompt on the screen that we can enter some text into. So let's go ahead and render those results somewhere. So let's see here. We need a string to hold the value from the result. Let's go ahead and just make this, scope this to the component. So that should be good there. And then when we click the button, it's going to prompt. And then we'll go ahead and display the result in our alert box. Let's do this. We'll give that our default value. And then we'll be able to change that value when we call this JS interop here. And make sure we put that in quotes. Let's see, using a local variable before it is declared. There we go. I think the compiler's having a little trouble here. this is not how this normally works. Let's try, not sure why it's doing what it's doing. Let's make it, oh, I see, there was a missing quote at the end. I don't know why the compiler's not catching the right problem. It's giving me kind of a false positive there. Let's see if I can build it. Even though there's red underscores, I'm getting a successful build. So I've got kind of like a false error that's happening. There's a new Razor engine with this version of .NET, and sometimes you'll see strange things happen like that. Reloading the page actually will clear some of that up sometimes. So now we should be able to run this. There we go. And we have our show button. If we click show, we can put any message there. And you can see this is my creative prompt message here. And whatever we put in this box, should appear right here in our alert. So we're actually making a call to JavaScript through this this Razor class library that we added, and it's all abstracted away, so we don't actually see any of the JavaScript. You didn't see me add any JavaScript files to the application, and yet it's using JavaScript behind the scenes to create a native prompt right here in the application and show a pop-up box. And then it gets the results back from JavaScript and puts them in the Razor view. So how does it do all of that? Well, you can see there is a JavaScript file in Common Components here called example.js interop. And that's where the JavaScript code lives. And it's using a module pattern here. So it has the ES6 module. It's saying export function show prompt. This is what's available to the Blazor application. And the Blazor application gets that by running this JavaScript JS runtime or JS interop, and it actually loads this JavaScript module kind of lazily with the application. So you can see it's actually an object in .NET called lazy. So it's a lazy task that returns a JavaScript object reference. That JavaScript object reference is actually the JavaScript module that it can execute by calling the prompt method, and we get the full life cycle of that JavaScript method. So we can call into it, pass parameters to it, get results back, display those in .NET. So it's pretty cool stuff. All that is happening within this Razor class library. So none of that code's actually inside of my project. It's just dependent upon this class library. So let's do something else with this. I'm going to add a Blazor server project here. I want to show one more thing I think is really cool. So I'm going to do a new project. Let's do Blazor app. Let's see, what did we call the previous application? Let me go back for a second. I called it Blazor class libs. Let's do another one. Again, add new project. We'll choose Blazor. Blazor class libs server. So this is going to be a server-side Blazor project. We'll choose server app, make sure I'm on .NET 5. Hit create. So now I've got Blazor, Blazor server and a Blazor WebAssembly application. And Visual Studio is trying to shame me on live Twitch TV. Notice the spinning cursor. Visual Studio, why do you hurt my feelings? Why? It's telling me to take a drink. It's 10 a.m., but judging from what experience I'm getting from Visual Studio, I probably should have something a little better in that cup. It's just tea. It's just tea. Oh, that's never a good sign. I'm going to go ahead and try to kill it. We'll kill it. I don't know why it's misbehaving. I had to reinstall Visual Studio. Maybe it's mad at me. Maybe it's not happy. It's the second time on the show today. It's stalled out. All right, so we've got our Blazor server project. Just so we can differentiate these a little bit easier, just so it's easier for you viewers, let's go ahead and add, oh geez, okay, there it goes. Let's add, I'm going to add a solution folder. Solution folders don't actually really do anything to the executing code or how it's organized on disk. It's just for the Solution Explorer here. And I'm going to just say this is WebAssembly. So we'll go ahead and drop all of our WebAssembly files into this. See, I'm getting confused here myself. There we go. We'll put all the WebAssembly project in there because the WebAssembly project has 3 projects in it. So now we have WebAssembly. This one is Blazor server. So we'll go ahead and create another folder there. And again, these are just logical naming folders. So it's not going to do anything to our app. So we'll put our server app here. And then we'll just leave our class library out here so we could see everything nice and easy. And Chris says this, when Visual Studio crashes, it's time to stand up and take a break. I can agree with that. Sitting all day at home working is pretty rough on your body, actually. So I've been fortunate enough to have some VR to play with. So I'll get up and take a quick VR break, jump in with the VR headset and get some really actually exercise. It's pretty fun stuff. All right, so we've got server and WebAssembly apps. Now that we can kind of see them a little more intelligently in these folders, we've got our component library here. Let's look at our Blazor server app for a second. It's not referencing the component library, so let's go ahead and add that dependency. So we'll do add a project reference again, and we'll hit our common components here. And then once again in our imports file, we are going to do a using common components. That will make them available to the project. And I can come into my index page and I can create an alert box here. So it all works the same even though it's on the server. But here's something that's really cool. I have an index page in my server app. I also have an index page in my client app. So why don't I just take the index page and move it to my common components app or common components library? So I could do that, and I can come into my application, both the client and the server, Blazor WebAssembly and Blazor server apps, and delete that index page because it exists in both projects and there's essentially no difference between, well, now there isn't. They're going to be one common index component. This index component is slightly different than just the, for example, the alert component, because it does have a route directive on it. So if I were to go to my Blazor server or my Blazor client app, because I've deleted, I have removed that index component and I've put it in my common class library, you'll see it's got no routing. So it says, sorry, there's nothing at this address. And if I loaded my server application, it would do the same thing because it can't find this route anymore because I've moved it to these common component libraries. So how do we fix that? Because this is actually a real thing that we can do. We can put our index page, even though it has a route, we can put it in our shared class library here, and we can actually route to it. So I'm going to open my client library, and in my app .razor, you can see I have a router that is looking at app assembly, and it says type of program, and it needs, if you look at the signature here, it actually wants a system.reflection.assembly. If I wanted to add additional if I want to add additional routes from other assemblies, I can actually do that. When I hit space, you can see I actually get IntelliSense for the thing that I need. And it's going to kind of dull it out here. You might have a hard time seeing that, but it says additional assemblies there. So if I type additional assemblies, I can actually create a list of assemblies that gives me routing. So in here, let me take this question really quick before I move on. And it says, can you share what your setup environment is and a use case of why you'd want to do this? So why you'd want to do this. So say I have a Blazor server app that I've developed, and now I want to move it to a WebAssembly application. Or maybe I'm writing a set of common components, and I want to test whether they work on Blazor server and WebAssembly without any kind of unknown consequences of running it in one context or another. There's quite a few reasons you might want to do this. Again, maybe you're porting code from one type of Blazor application to another. Maybe you have things that you share across several Blazor apps. Maybe some of them run a Blazor server. Maybe they're all WebAssembly apps. But you can set up your routing and share those routings between multiple assemblies, which is really cool. One good instance of this, it's not using this very Blazor-y convention yet. It may in the future. We'll have to see. But one kind of example of how this could be used is the way authentication works in MVC right now. So when you add authentication to a Blazor or an MVC or any ASP.NET app, say that, any ASP.NET app uses a Razor class library, even though it's not a Blazor version, it is a Razor Pages version. It uses a similar convention. It comes with all of its own routes and areas and all of those things right out of the box. So this kind of opens you up to being able to add entire application features from a component library rather than just individual widgets and things. So there's quite a bit of different use cases for this. So I'm going to move this down so it gives me a little bit more space to write. And I'm going to say new. And then it's going to be, I can never remember the exact syntax for this. So let's go to Google real quick. And I'll find this page that talks about routing. So I can share this in chat as well. So this is the documentation page for routing. And if you look under, I think it's under additional scenarios possibly. Let's see, maybe not. I'm on the wrong navigation site. It is route to components from multiple assemblies. You'll find the exact syntax here. And I'm going to accidentally open up Visual Studio Code. We'll get out of that. So we can go ahead and paste that code in here. And this component one actually is very, very relevant to this. You can use any component from your assembly in here. So what it will do, we could put an alert box in there. Even though alert box doesn't have a route, this should work because it will find the assembly not the individual component itself, but the actual assembly it belongs to, scan the assembly, and bring in all the routing for that assembly. So we should be able now to route to that entire, anything that's under here that has a route. So let's try this again. Remember, we got an error last time, sorry, there's nothing to see at this address. Now we have hello world. So 404, not 404. So now we've got that in our component library. Our client application. So it's looking for that page and it's finding it. Now we just need to copy this, and we can do the same in our server application. And I know for a fact that I'm going to get an error, and it's something I wanted to show. So I'm purposely letting this error happen because I want to explain something. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Additional assemblies, alert box. Again, that could be anything in that common components assembly, as long as it can find it. Let's go ahead and navigate over to our server app, and we'll run Blazor server. And you can see a gigantic error spew out here. And it says invalid operation, cannot provide a value for property, example JS on type, blah, blah. This is the important part of the error message right here. And anytime you see this, I've said this a million times because this one always catches me, and I'm trying to make it muscle memory. There is no registered service for type. Whenever you see there is no registered service for type, registered service, that means you forgot, and this is something I do very often, it means you forgot to go into Startup CS and register the service. So we did this on the WebAssembly app, but we haven't done it here yet. So I'll say services, add scoped example JS interop, and we need to bring in that using statement again. That'll clear that using statement up, and now I can run the app again, and it should be successful, and it is. So let's look at this side by side. We've got that running. Let's go ahead and run this application. So we have two different Blazor applications running in two different Blazor contexts. The one on the left is running Blazor server side. The one on the right is running Blazor WebAssembly. Both applications are using a shared index page. Both applications are using that same index page that is in the common components library. So now anywhere in either of these projects that we have views that we want to pull out, we can take these and move them into a common location. So again, if you were migrating from Blazor server to Blazor WebAssembly, or maybe the opposite direction, if you wanted to do that, there's different reasons to do one or the other. Maybe you have both. Maybe you have both instances of the application, one running in server, one running. Maybe you have inside the firewall people on the server app, and outside the firewall people running WebAssembly. Who knows these days? I'm going to go ahead and drop a new folder in here, call it pages. This is just for organization purposes. I'm going to go ahead and drop my index page. And again, I can move anything into this folder that I want to share between these two applications. So I can go ahead and drop those in. Oops, I already have a counter component. Move that one. The only difference you might see is something like this. So fetch data is a little bit different between the client and server. So we only got a few minutes here, but I'll try to clean this up a little bit. Let's discuss. So let's take a look at the top of the file, and you'll see some subtle differences. Anything below the below line 5, 6 here is going to be the same. This is all identical. All of this code is identical. Maybe the code block has something a little bit different. We'll look at that in a second. Up here, though, you'll see I'm using a different service here. I'm using a weather forecast service for the server-side Blazor, and I'm using an HTTP call for client-side Blazor. So this is actually a pretty big difference as to how the component fetches the data. So in this scenario, what I need to do is create a common service that both the client and server can use, but internally, so we'd create an interface that is common between both of them. And then the implementation, the concrete service, will use its own method to go get the data. So we would have to do that. And then this method call would change slightly as well. So this one's using HTTP. This one's using a service directly. And we'd have to change that to use the interface method instead. So we can still share this, but there's some additional work that would have to be done to do that. So let's see, we've got the counter component and the index page moved out. And I think I may have broke something. Let's double check here just to be sure. No, it found it. It still found the routes. So we are good. I thought the namespace may have changed a little bit when I moved those pages. So you can see the counter still works. Let's go ahead and move that fetch data page real quick, just so you can all see how that process would look. Again, it's going to be a little more involved. We're going to go over the hour, probably just a slight amount. But let's see how we can do this. So we've got, on the client, we have HTTP. So let's dig in. Let's close the server app here for a second. And we'll clean up all these windows. We'll do a little, let's do tab bankruptcy. All the windows go away. All the windows go. We'll go to the fetch data component on the WebAssembly application. And let's abstract this into an interface. And again, this is a false positive, possibly? Nope, ambiguity between fetch data forecasts and fetch data forecasts. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know where it's getting that from. Did I? No, I didn't drag it into the common space here. I don't know why it's saying this. It's probably the new Razor engine just being extra special today. Looks like the error's gone away. So there, we're good. So let's look how we can do this. We need an interface. So right now we're injecting HTTP client directly. What I want to do is create an interface that is common between this fetch data operation. So I have here get from JSON async. Let's go ahead and look at the server one again. I have fetch data here. This one uses forecasts get from, or get forecast async. I think I want to use that methodology there. So let's get, let's look at the forecast service implementation here. And I'm going to right click on this and look at my quick refactorings. And this one I'm going to say extract interface. So I'm going to use extract interface, and it's going to give me an iWeather forecast service. And we'll go ahead and hit OK here. So now it's got an iWeather forecast service that looks like this. And it's a public interface of iWeather forecast service that returns an array of weather forecasts of task. And then it's going to have a method that accepts a date and gives me the weather forecasts. I'm going to take this code and I'm going to move it to my common components. So let's go ahead and set up a folder first. We could say services, and I'm going to add a new item. we'll add a new interface, and I'll just let the tooling take over here. I'm going to paste this in. So common component services, iWeather forecast service. And then we'll go ahead and rename the file. I hit Control period, and it's going to rename the file for me. So you can see the file name change down here. And now I need a weather forecast object. So we have weather forecasts being used in both of those projects as well. So we need to move that over so our common library can handle the weather forecast object too. So let's just double check and make sure that weather forecast is the same on both of these projects. It should be. This one's going to be in our shared library. We can look at those side by side, and they are identical, but oddly enough, even though these were written, I assume by, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say Steve Sanderson probably wrote both of these. The classes are identical, but the order in which the properties are defined is different. So that's interesting, but it's not anything programmatically challenging. It's not really going to make any difference. Hey, Eagle's here. Eagle, welcome. We're just sharing some class libraries across. So if you're just joining us, we have a server application, Blazor server, Blazor WebAssembly, and a shared class library. And we're sharing as much logic as we can across these two applications. So I need to move weather forecast now. I'm going to take it out of this. I'm going to go ahead and remove, I'm going to copy this weather forecast here, and we're just going to take it out. Weather forecast goes away because it's going to get shared across all of this. So we'll take this one, and we will remove it from the shared class library here, which makes us question now whether we even need that shared class library. And then we can, let's just throw it in the root. We're going to be a little lazy. We're starting to get a little pressed on time here. We'll add a new class. Again, you don't need to name this thing. Tooling can take care of that for us. We'll go ahead and drop the weather forecast here. I'll hit Control period and rename the file. Boom. Now class 1 is weather forecast. All right, so we've got our weather forecast. We have our service. And we need to update now our using statements. So since we moved weather forecast out, we need common components to be brought into scope, so we can use that. Let's double check here. Implement interface. This seems like a false positive again, or false negative. I don't know why we're getting that. I'm going to pause on that one. I'm not going to... It's saying we're not implementing the interface, but we actually have extracted the interface from this file. Let's see what it adds here. Yeah, this is identical. I don't see why we're getting that exactly. So we'll go ahead and pause on that for a moment. We'll come back to that and see if we can figure out what it's angry with. Let's see here. So we've got our weather forecast and our service in place. And on our, we've got a couple more errors here. So we removed that library. That can go away. So there's a bit of refactoring that's going to have to be done. That one I need to look at again. We need to add this common component. And these may actually, yep, it's resolved that other error. Remove the unused namespaces out of here. And we will clean up again with the using statement. As we move these things out to a shared project, they will clear that all up. So hot tip from Eagle here is to switch your error list from entire solution to a specific project, which is great. I nailed it with the namespacing issue. So what it was, it still had it had an interface that had two different types of weather forecast it was looking for, and when I consolidated them through cleaning up all the other errors, it resolved that interface as well. So that cleaned that error up. So finally, we've got a shared weather forecast. We need to go over to our client application. And in our fetch data, we're actually going to be removing this pretty soon here. What I need to do is I need to remove this HTTP client and replace it with the new interface that we just made. So what I want is an iWeather forecast service, and I don't have it in scope here because it would be common components dot services dot iWeather forecast service, and it's not HTTP anymore. It is just weather forecast service. And now we can call weather forecast service, and it's not going to be get from JSON async anymore. It is going to be, actually, let's back this up just a second. Let's rewrite this because I want to reuse that in a moment. Forecast equals await weather forecast service dot get forecast async, and then we'll pass it a date. And now we've taken that service and moved it out. Now we're only hitting this against, hey, Jeff Blankenberg's here. Hey, welcome to the show, Jeff. It's been a while since we've had a chat, my friend. How are you? And then Eagle with another good tip here. Components shouldn't use HTTP client directly. It makes so much stuff easier in the long run, including testing, if you move those things out to a service. Jeff's doing well. That's good to hear, man. So we've got our weather forecast service. We're hitting the interface, but there's no implementation of it on the client. So let's go ahead and add a new folder again. We'll call it services. I'm going to copy this line of code out. And then we're going to add a new class here. Again, naming doesn't matter at this point. It is going to be a weather, let's call it HTTP weather forecast service, because this one's going to use HTTP, and this implements the weather cast service interface, weather forecast service interface, and then I'll hit control period one more time and tell it to implement that interface, and it's going to stub it out for me. And then I'll go ahead and paste this code in here that I stole from the component, and we'll go ahead and tell it to return. Let's see, do I need... Yeah, I should be able to return this directly. Public async task. Now I need my HTTP client. So what we're going to do here is we need a constructor that takes the iWeather forecast or the HTTP client. Kiersik says I think I just wrote a blog post on this pattern. If you have a link to that blog post, if it's published, go ahead and share it. That'd be great. People that are watching could use that. And, so let's see here. We need to inject now the HTTP client. That should do it there. And then we'll call that HTTP. Then we need a field here. I know there's a new C# 90 way to do this, I think, that makes it so much easier. But I can't remember off the top of my head how to do it. Actually, this needs to be... you know what? I think our tooling actually will do this for us. There we go. That does it. Control period for the win. So there's our HTTP client. It doesn't have a definition of get from JSON async. So let's control period one more time. And there is an extension method that I'm missing. So I think this is it. We've got a weather forecast service that uses HTTP client. Let's see. Do I use the built-in HTTP client or a third-party REST client like REST Sharp? I've never used REST Sharp. Doesn't mean there's nothing that's bad about REST Sharp. I actually haven't heard of it. I'm just using the built-in one. And then one more time, control period. I'm going to rename the file again just to make things nice and clear. And I can close this now. And I have to go in, and again, I want to avoid that error that says that I forgot to register a service. And I'm going to register a service this time that is going to be an let's see, which one goes first again? I can never remember which goes first. T service, T implementation. So I want the weather forecast service here. Weather forecast service there, and I'm misspelling something wrong. Here we go. There we go. So the using statement comes in, and then the implementation is the HTTP weather forecast service. Make sure I'm spelling these all right, because it will throw a fit. It will not compile if I don't. So it should be HTTP weather forecast service. Make sure I had that in the right order. And then, again, using statements matter in a big way. That should now register. Whenever it sees weather forecast service, it will bring in the HTTP version of that. And now I can take this code and we'll move it. Let's go ahead and take this fetch data, and we'll move that fetch data off to pages. And let's see, fetch data. So now that it uses this interface that is in the common set of components, it's fine in here. And we need to then tweak our server application. Kiersik says, I use this pattern with HTTP client to use the same code between a Blazor WebAssembly application and a WPF app. That is a perfect example of code sharing with .NET using these shared class libraries. It's very good stuff that you can, very efficient programming that you can do. It's a great example of Kirsig. Let's see here. So I've got, in this view, I have fetch data. I have this Blazor class libserver data. Let's go ahead and pull that out. What I'm going to do is see what happens here. So I've got a weather forecast service here now. What I should be able to do, since all of this is the same, I should be able to remove this file. Let's not save that. Let's go ahead and delete this. And as long as I set up the right dependency injection, that file should just work now. So let's go over to this program CS. We'll go ahead and copy this line out. And we'll go over to startup here and say services dot. We'll go ahead and paste this in. I don't want the HTTP weather forecast service. In this application, I want the regular weather forecast service. So it's going to register this weather forecast service, replace that with this implementation now. So now that page is in our shared library. So let's reduce this down again. That page is now, here, let's do this guy. It is in the shared or common components fetch data. It is no longer in the server application. Now it's just got a host and an error page. And this one in the client application now has a fetch data page that shouldn't be there. So we'll go ahead and we'll drop that one as well. So this one has an empty pages folder. So let's see what happens when we run. Let's do the WebAssembly. Okay, we're on the WebAssembly app. Let's see if we get any errors when we run it. Let's see if all that did the trick. And we're about 20 minutes over, so we'll have to see here. And look at that, fetch data just worked. That's a good sign. So all of our pages now have been moved to a shared class library. Let's go over to our server app. We'll run that one. And let's give that a try. Running the server app now. Counter, fetch data. Ooh, there's an error. There's an error on fetch data. So what happened here? Cannot provide a value for weather forecast service. Component type is not registered. I thought we registered that service. We did register that service. It's saying we did not. Right. So let's try something here. Let's clean the solution. Let's rebuild. Let's make sure that everything got saved. And then we'll run it one more time. And Eagle's pointing out it may be something with the life cycle of let's try. Oh, we have two. That's what it is. I see what it is. There's actually two places where this is registered. I left, this was in here from earlier before we added the weather forecast service. So it is trying to resolve that in a different way. So I'm just messing up DI is what it is. Yeah, that should actually, no, that did not do it. That didn't fix it. Let's take a look here. Weather forecast service. Weather forecast service. This should work. I don't know. I don't know why it's not resolving the DI. Scoped is scoped to the component's life. Let's do add singleton here, see if this does anything to change it. No, it's still erroring out. So oddly enough, and this should work, there is something that it doesn't like with the DI here. So it's adding an weather forecast service. Adds a singleton service of the type specified in weather forecast service with an implementation of weather forecast service. So got a couple things coming in here. Where is the service defined? The service is, let me just double check, make sure it's got the right one. Yeah, it's got the right, nope. That was it. Mr. Magoo, you're a genius. I accidentally have two iWeather forecast service interfaces. So that one needs to go away. So I accidentally duplicated, and I know how I did it. I created the interface in the server project and then migrated it to the common components and forgot to remove it when I took it from this class server. So there were two different types of iWeather forecast service. Let's see. Now I need to go fix this, I think. Yep. There we go. So they were using the wrong weather forecast service. So while they had the same name, they were not technically the same type, and hence the error. There we go. So now I've got the server application. Mr. Magoo, you set me on the right path once again. Good stuff, my friend. We've got the WebAssembly, we've got the server application, both using different methods of fetching that data, but the same component is rendering that data out. So that is class libraries in a nutshell. And I broke the golden rule here. I went over by about 20 minutes. But I really like this feature. I think it's super cool, especially if you're building component libraries like I am. This comes out to be super helpful. Another instance, somebody was asking for, like, why would you want to do this type of thing? When you're migrating to different versions of Blazor as well, you may want to segregate some of your code into class libraries like this, just to make it easier to move between those versions. There was some decent differences between .NET 3.2 and .NET 5 as far as Blazor goes. And if you have everything in a common library like this, you can do file new Blazor project and just grab the shell of that application and then run it that way. You could put this in different Blazor contexts as well. There may be some desktop things coming soon. So you could theoretically have a Blazor desktop app that uses all the same code, but has kind of a different shell application that it's running inside of. So you're going to reduce a lot of duplication with this. This may not be the thing that you do daily, sharing these routes across applications, but it is possible, and it is a very powerful feature. So I'm going to look for a channel to raid. This is about all the time I have today, and I've gone just slightly over as well. So let's see if we've got other shows coming up here on the channel. So let me double check that real quick. Yeah, we've got TJ's coming up here pretty soon, and we've got Alyssa Nicole later this afternoon. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave the channel here for now. Let y'all take a break. You can come back and see TJ's show here in a little bit if you want to learn a little bit about React. And then later on, Alyssa will be here to talk about web development in general. She does a lot of CSS stuff. SMAB UK, yes, UK, man, right at the end. I am sorry. But thank you all for joining. And we'll see you on Friday on my Twitch channel. And then, of course, all week here, there's more content coming. So stick around. Make sure you hit the follow button so you get alerts when those other hosts come on for their shows this afternoon. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a good week.